Welcome to the Rise Network podcast show, a podcast dedicated to help you reach your dream lifestyle through investing in real estate. We're going to be sitting down with new, intermediate, and experienced investors to talk all about real estate and how it has changed their lives. If you're looking to scale your portfolio or even just get into real estate investing, you're in the right place. Make sure to tune in. Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Rise Real Estate Investing Podcast, and we are back after, I guess, a 1 week hiatus. You're This is your host, Austine and
Mayu. What's going on, everybody?
Austin? Yeah, I already lost my touch.
Yeah, I know, right?
Just the 1 week break. Yeah.
It's always nice when someone calls you out on the Facebook group for not releasing the podcast, and then I'm like, oh shit.
It's like, hey, maybe people won't notice. Yeah, exactly. That's so funny, man. How's everything going with you?
It's good, man. It's good. We both, I think, just been crazy busy. The real estate world, as we know it, is fucking busy as well, right? Like everywhere, deals, mortgages, all sorts of different things. What's busy with me? I just had the tiny flip close on Monday, so that was a sale. And then the private that I had for my Chesley flip, which is closing today, and like his lawyer was just being super slow and like complicated and whatever. So I ended up just closing it cash. But now we're gonna resecure with private in like probably a week. Like I'll just take my time now, just kind of refinancing to private. But that's good, man. And then mortgages and coaching is going good as well. We had some strategy sessions with our students and the coaching program. It's interesting. We have a couple of people inquire from the Rise podcast that Corey did with us. Like they inquired the coaching side. So I ended up chatting with them there. So it's pretty interesting. But what's new with you, man? What's going on there?
That's awesome, man. On my end, I'm looking to get a refinance done on a property. I wouldn't say it's a refi. Yeah, it is technically a refinance. So I bought something with private duplex, finishing renovations. So the renovations are about a week and a half out. But I knew that booking appraisals are going to be busy. So I decided to book an appraisal now before my renos are done in anticipation that they kind of line up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the private money is going to expire the end of August. The appraisal is coming in on July 15th. But to get that appraisal, it was a pain in the ass, man. So we're working with Desjardins right now, credit union, and they loan based on the asset first, followed by the individual second, right? Even for duplexes, which I wasn't aware of, but it's because we're working on their business side right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, they pretty much said, call your own appraiser. We don't do that for you. So I went on Google, did my Googles and was calling every single appraiser. And I had 4 bluntly just say, we're not booking right now. We're way too backed up. One person said from now until, I guess, like 3 or 4 weeks, I'm doing 35 appraisers.
That's crazy.
Not appraisers, appraisals. Yeah. It's ridiculous, man. 35 in 3 weeks. Like, I don't even know how they have time to pump through these things.
Yeah. I might have been telling you this morning, on the mortgage side, it's not even really the banks that are holding us up. It's the freaking appraisal companies, man. People that come in with like a 30-day closing. It's like, how are we going to get an appraisal done? Like, appraisers want at least like 3 to 4 weeks now to like get an appraisal done. So you almost have to order an appraisal before you like really submit the application. It's kind of the new norm, as you call it. But yeah, there's always some form of like a backlog somewhere in the pipeline, right? Like whether it's the banks, the mortgage, anything, like, I don't know.
Yeah, nowadays you can't, like before we could get away with 30-day closing, even during busy times, it was tough, but you could probably just stretch it. Now it's a risk. It's like 50-50 that you're not going to get the appraisal in. And if it comes in, it might be like, I've noticed there's a lot more issues on the appraisal side of things, right? Like sometimes they're asking for more money nowadays. And I've heard that multiple times. Like by 3 or 4 different people. Yeah. And even for myself, like the duplex we're getting appraised is $700 plus HST, which is not terrible, but that's not particularly cheap as well. I remember paying $400 for a duplex appraisal.
Yeah, so like $300-$400 for a single family is normal, $400-$600 for a duplex, and then $500-$700 for a triplex is normal. I had a client pay, I think it was like $1,300 or $1,400 for an appraiser, and that was the only appraiser that would pick it up, right? So then we really didn't have an option. It's like, okay, what's our other option? Do we go private? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? You might as well just pay the extra for the appraiser. And then the freaking appraiser was still late, man. We paid a premium because he was like, I can get it done on time, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like 4 days later, something like that. It was just ridiculous. But
yeah, and it's tough, man. It's tough to go back to the clients and explain these things as well, right? Like it's just it's out of a lot of people's hands, right? Like it's just something gets backed up in the supply chain and everyone down the supply chain gets screwed. So it is what it is. In today's episode, we have a treat for you. We have James and Riley. We'll start off with James. James is an Airbnb expert and also has written a book, a co-authored a book, Airbnb for Dummies. He also has a course and does consulting for Airbnb people who are looking to break into the Airbnb rental space. He's helped over thousands of students. And like, if you hear some of the numbers on his deals, they're pretty insane. So this guy definitely knows what he's doing. And we have him partnered up with Riley, and Riley's a real estate investor himself. He's relatively young, in his mid-20s. I've also, Mayu and I personally know Riley via Corey's coaching program. He's also a coach down there. And he's a multifamily investor. He was able to scale his portfolio via joint ventureships. And Riley and James are doing something pretty neat now. James has the Airbnb expertise side. Riley is the buy and hold BRRRR expert. So they partnered together to bring to the joint venture partners on BRRRRing properties, but also Airbnb-ing it for higher cash flow. So pretty unique episode. We get into case studies. We get into their story. It's going to be a fantastic one. Make sure to tune in. Today, we are joined with our very special guests, Riley and James. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us on here.
Awesome, guys. So myself and Austine both know you guys at varying levels, but why don't you each just give our audience a quick introduction about yourself, where you guys got started, how things have changed for you over the last couple of years, and what you're doing now.
Sure, yeah. So basically my background, and this is Riley, my background was in basically just like a home maintenance company. So I ran a home maintenance company for a few years and then transitioned into doing property management. So I did property management in Southwestern Ontario with Corey McKinnon. So Corey obviously had a portfolio there, or has a portfolio in London and Sarnia. So I oversaw all of his portfolio there and did some acquisitions for him as well. And was locking up some deals, doing the renovation management. So that was my kind of foot in the door experience. And then I've transitioned into buying multifamily properties right now and Airbnbs with joint venture partners.
And for myself, this is James, obviously. So I started out managing other people's properties on Airbnb and actually started a short-term rental management company. And then just over the years, kind of got more and more involved with Airbnb and short-term rentals and that whole world. Got to be quite an expert in the space, and then wrote Airbnb for Dummies there. And then now, similar to Riley, just working mostly on I do some coaching and consulting with different people around the short-term rental space, and then buying properties. Specifically right now, we're buying properties north of Toronto and kind of cottage country area, buying them for the purpose of short-term rental.
Gotcha. And you guys are business partners now, is that correct?
That we are.
So how did that marriage come along? Like, so one was buying multifamilies, one was doing Airbnbs in Toronto, and together you guys found a way to, I guess, take the synergistic strategies that each one of you guys are using and putting it together in one strategy. So can you tell us a bit about the business or what you're doing in real estate investing together?
Yeah, well, so when you take an Airbnb person and then a multifamily real estate investing person and you get them to move into the same house together, then it only takes a couple of months before you guys have your first Airbnb actually purchased. So that's actually what happened with us is I was living downtown Toronto and Riley was just basically moving into Toronto from London. And so Riley ended up moving in here, and then it was just kind of him getting in my ear. I'd always been thinking about actually purchasing the properties for short-term rental. It kind of seemed like a pretty obvious natural progression, but with Riley's expertise, obviously just made that a whole lot easier. And so then we started doing that. And now we're basically business partners on a few different levels. So we're buying these properties together ourselves. We're also working with some investing partners to buy properties under joint venture structures. And then we're also working with people, basically coaching people on how to actually go through and build a portfolio investing in short-term rental properties.
It's interesting because I think generally when you have two people in a room and one does Airbnb and one does multifamily BRRRR, they just sit there and like debate about which one's a better approach and like the pros and cons of each approach, right? So I'm sure you guys, when you first met and when you're first talking, you're kind of like head to head about it. It's like, nah, Airbnb is definitely the way to go. Nah, BRRRRing is definitely the way to go. And then you guys realize that if you pair the two strategies together, your returns are magnified, right? And you guys each have a different area of expertise in that, right? So that's awesome. So I'm Riley, I guess we'll talk about your journey first. Did you jump right into BRRRRing properties for Airbnb, or did you BRRRR like your own properties first, and did you try the long-term rental route?
Yeah, like background, I guess my journey would be, like I mentioned in the beginning, I started off with Corey, did his property management, did a few flips with him, and So I had a bit of exposure already with the renovation and the renovation space and quite a bit in property management in and of itself. Then for me, it was just like, okay, well, how do I create my own empire? How do I build my own business? And naturally, like 2 to 4 units kind of stood to me as like the sweet spot. I didn't even think of Airbnb as at all. I actually do still envision it as being more of an advanced strategy, to be honest. There's a lot to handle. Because if you think of like a long-term rental, you just like, you obviously figure out the amount of rent. So maybe it's $1,200 for 1 bedroom. You set that rent and you forget it and you're done. Whereas like for an Airbnb, like you're really in the hospitality business. So you're going to have like 100, 200, maybe even 300 guests in the course of the year. So there's a lot more to kind of manage, and all the rates are not the exact same at all. So there's a lot of price optimization to do. It is definitely more of an advanced strategy. So when I had started off at the beginning, I wasn't even looking at Airbnb as an option. Mainly it was just 2 to 4 units. I do believe that single family properties tend to be a bit more expensive for what they are. Like Grant Cardone says, like for the price per unit is just way too inflated. Like you're not going to get your bang for your buck unless you're going to do a flip, student rental, or Airbnb. Those are the only ways that I believe that a single family would make sense. And commercial is just too expensive, 35, 40% down, depending on the project. I just couldn't do that. So I did a few duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, partnered up with people that had money. They had mortgages. I did all the heavy lifting, all the active partner work. And we co-owned the properties 50-50. So I did a couple of those over the course of 2 years. And then like James mentioned, we moved in together, and we've just started doing a bunch of Airbnbs. Yeah.
So James, so then I'm curious on your end, because you were doing the Airbnb side, right? And I'm sure things were going pretty good, right? Why go into acquiring real estate where now you've added layers to your model, right? Why not just keep doing essentially you're doing Airbnb re-rental, or there's a name for it, right? But you were essentially just re-renting from people and renting from people and re-renting it out on Airbnb. Why not just blow up that model?
And one more layer to add to that question, if that question wasn't already complex enough, is also you're doing it in Toronto. So that I assume that plays a factor, because I've always thought Toronto wasn't supposed to be the greatest place to do the re-rental strategy because of all the policies and regulations.
Yeah. There's really nowhere good to do the re-rental strategy is my honest opinion about it. It's a really crap model, and it's actually not the model that I was using. So the model that I was using was basically a percentage management fee model. So we would manage the properties for the property owners and collect a percentage of the overall revenue as a management fee. It's called rental arbitrage, that kind of like re-rental strategy. We actually started out doing that. And I did have, to be fair to the model, like I did have 2 units that did exceptionally well and made crazy money. Like we were making $4,000 a month or so profit on each one of those units. And that was great. But those are what I call unicorn properties. Like 99% of all properties out there, if you're doing the re-rental strategy, you're taking a lot of risk for very little reward, because you have to pay first month's, last month's rent, security deposit, and furnishing expense right up front. And so to make that money back, it's really challenging. So I never really got that far into the model, because after I picked up a couple of units, I realized, wow, this is a pretty flawed model. So the management fee model, on the other hand, is a really great model because it's no risk. Like 20%, if your management fee is 20%, of zero, if the property does poorly, is still just zero. Like you're not losing money. Whereas if you have a bad month with the rental arbitrage model, you're paying thousands of dollars out of your pocket. So that was a really good model, and it worked really well. And that's still the model that I teach people when I coach people around the short-term rental kind of management side of things. But it honestly is it's something that I've always wanted to do, to actually own the properties. Like naturally, when you manage the properties, it's great because it's so low barrier to entry. Like you don't have to shell out any money. You're more just kind of doing similar to what Riley did when he's doing property management with Corey. It's like you're putting in the work, you're putting in the sweat equity, and that's great. But then at a certain point, you've got the money set aside, you've got it built up, and you're thinking, okay, well, what if I could just manage my own property? I could just go and buy it, and then I get to reap the reward of the appreciation on the property every year. I get to reap the reward of, when I'm paying that mortgage, I'm building equity in the property. I don't have another client to manage. I'm just managing myself, and I get complete and total autonomy. And a big part of it too is like I get 100% of the cash flow for the property, because if we're charging a 20% management fee, that property owner is still profiting quite a bit in just cash flow typically. So now we're just managing it ourselves, and we get to reap the rewards of all of that. So it makes a lot of sense to invest in. And for me, it's a lot more so like kind of the passive side of the way I view kind of my income. is I've got my active income that I get from mainly coaching at this point and the consulting that I do. And then this is just one of the ways that I like to kind of put my money to work for me.
Yeah, I know. You hit the nail on the head there. You want to have multiple income streams. It'd be nice to have an income stream that's relatively passive. And that's something that you could do with this multifamily investing. I know you guys are setting up systems for the Airbnb, but if you ever want to pivot over to long-term rentals, you could just pivot over to a fully furnished rental, right? So that's definitely a great strategy. One thing that I did want to ask is that, so you guys are doing this particularly with multifamily properties, and I assume more in the, I wouldn't call it outskirts, but outside of Toronto, outside of GTA, which to some people in the GTA, they consider anything an outskirt. That's not downtown Toronto. But how does Airbnb work in those areas? Because a lot of people commonly think that you're not going to be able to find any, is it tenants? Not tenants, but I guess clients in those areas.
I thought James or someone early on said that you guys were doing north of Toronto, like the Muskoka area. Is that the area, or what area are you doing primarily now?
Yeah, so we're mainly looking right now. It's actually single family homes that we're doing with the short-term rental strategy. Multifamily doesn't tend to be as good for short-term rental just because of the nature of having two different groups in a property with noise, things like that. And we're looking at the areas like basically just cottage country. So Kawartha Lakes area, Muskoka area, kind of north and northeast of Toronto, and really capitalizing on that cottage boom. Like that's really what we're geared towards, is cottagers. So the properties that we're picking up are kind of ideal cottage properties. And so the reality is like 80%, 90% of our revenue is coming in between June and September. And then the off season, you're just having a lot more seasonality. So that's what a lot of people think, is they think like it's hard to find guests for out there. And it is in the off season, but the on season makes up for it, because like if you can bring in $70,000, $80,000 on a single family home within a few months of the summertime, then it doesn't really matter that you're only bringing in, $3,000 to $5,000 a month, let's say in the off season.
So let me ask you this, because I have this, I guess now we're kind of getting off on the tangent here about cottage rentals, but I have this discussion with some people, and basically right now we're at a point where cottage rentals could be like $3,000 for a week or whatever, like a week or weekend or whatever you want to call it. And if you go back maybe 2 years, 3 years, something like 2019, 2018, it was maybe at like 2,000, right? Maybe 2,300 or something like that for like a weekend or so, right? So what's your expectation on cottage rental rates in 3 years down the road when we're out of this COVID travel lockdown stuff and like people can go international, right?
Yeah.
Are you guys running your numbers on a lower rental rate, or are you assuming that rental rates will continue to go higher?
And let me add on to that, Mayu. That's a great question, because actually, just to point out something interesting, my girlfriend is going to a bachelorette, and it's at a cottage because you can't go anywhere else, right? And even my buddy just came from a cottage from a bachelor party. So that's where, like, obviously rates are inflated because high demand. But yeah, like let's dig into Mayu's question, because that was a fantastic question.
Sure. Really, in any analysis that you do, whether it's long-term, short-term, anything, you're going to always run the worst case scenario. And so obviously we're going to run the worst case scenario here on each of the properties that we're putting into the portfolio. And we're not basing anything off of like during COVID, like the COVID era. It's all pre-COVID. Like we're looking at 2018, early 2019, and just seeing what the numbers look like. And we're actually using those in the analysis. And obviously when we're partnering with people, we're just plain and simply saying, hey, this is abnormal. What we're experiencing right now, this year is just going to be crazy. But obviously that's awesome at the very beginning of the investment for them, because it's like, hey, like if we could bring in an extra 40, 50 grand this year, like that's just like this pure cash injection right into the business from the get-go that helps us to be able to get you your money back sooner. So I think that's why we have like a pretty long waiting list right now with people that want to buy Airbnbs with us, because it is just like a super abnormal season. And long term, we're not expecting that to be the case in terms of just the amount of income that we can bring in. Like the recent property there in the Kawarthas that we purchased, the worst case numbers were like around 50,000 for the single family. That's like worst case, like basing it off of like 2018, 2019 numbers. And if we were to do that, like we're pretty much breaking neutral, like we're just breaking even, maybe making like $200-$300 a month in cash flow. And we were happy with that. Like if worst case scenario, if that were to happen, we're fine with that. We're comfortable with it. So I'd recommend to anyone listening, like if you're going to buy a short-term rental, run it off of the pre-COVID numbers and ensure that you are actually going to be satisfied if the worst case scenario were to happen, that the property is still not a donkey in your portfolio. Like it still performs well and you're still happy with it. Yeah.
Or on that note as well, if you're in a market where COVID caused a downturn, because obviously we're investing in a market where COVID caused a huge uptick in revenues because everyone was getting away to these cottages. But a lot of other markets, you saw the exact opposite. So a lot of the kind of urban centers during COVID, their revenue kind of nosedived. And similar to what Riley was saying, you kind of want to use that same strategies. If you're in one of those markets and you're looking to buy a short-term rental there, make sure you run numbers that are based off of COVID, that are the worst case scenario, so that you know what to expect in a worst case scenario, and you can make sure you're comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's awesome. Pandemic planning,
Yeah.
Risk mitigation on pandemics. That's amazing. And one thing I did want to ask is that so you guys are getting properties down at obviously Northern Ontario cottage areas. How are you sourcing these deals? Are they on market? Are you trying to find them off market?
Yeah, so we're doing a bit of both. We do. I have some flyer campaigns happening and some off-market kind of lead generation methods that we're using to find off-market properties. And at the same time, like there's still some hidden gems on the market. The one property that we had purchased there a few months ago was on the market for over 60 days, and because of that, it was just kind of this sitting duck. Like it was just this kind of a hidden gem to be accurate. But it was just like all lonesome by itself. No one had placed an offer on it for like 2.5 months. And so we came in and we were able to negotiate down like a really healthy rate. So there are still great deals on the market in certain like rural cottage areas. Like I wouldn't say that Muskokas would be necessarily a great place to go right now if you have something on the market. But if we're looking at like the Corthas, like there still are a few properties on the market that makes sense.
Gotcha. And what makes a desirable property? Because I'm assuming that this is just based off of assumptions. Is it has to be close by a lake or waterfront is one of them. Is there anything else that you look for a cottage Airbnb?
Yeah, like you mentioned, kind of lake access, lakefront. Ideally, kind of lake access, because when you're on the lakefront, you're paying a premium for sure. And then the other thing right now that we're looking at is like 4 to 6 bedrooms, because we want to be able to at least bring in like a larger group of people. When we can access a pool of 10, 15 guests, that's much healthier than if we can only solicit our market to like groups of 1 or 2. So 4 to 6 bedrooms are kind of that's our ideal. And then within like 2 to 2.5 hours from like the urban center of Toronto, we don't want to be too far away that people aren't willing to make a 3-4 hour drive, but 2.5 hours would be kind of our max end. Then like, honestly, just a distressed property, because we do want to be able to do the BRRRR to it. So we're looking at properties that, they need some TLC, not a full gut job by any means, but we can add in like an extra bedroom or 2. We just bought a property. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath, and it's on 100 acres of land. Then they actually also had this very tall garage. The previous owner was like an avid hunter. And so he actually built this like 20-foot garage. It was 20 feet high. It's probably about 10, 15 feet in depth. So we're looking for like really good value adds like that, because the cool thing is he used to just hang his kill or whatever, like the deer that he'd kill in the garage, right? And that's why it's so high. Mm-hmm. For us, we're looking at it and we're like, well, that's easily going to be an Airbnb. That's just a tiny house. Like, in the tiny house movement, we can have 2 great lofts up there, and we can have like a kitchenette, a bathroom on the main floor. Mm-hmm. So that in and of itself probably has 30 to 50 grand worth of value to us that it didn't have to maybe someone else that wanted to buy the property and didn't want to hunt and hang their kill in the garage. Mm-hmm. So, those are the other kind of amenities that we're looking for around the property.
Awesome. And what are you trying to avoid with the property? Because I know that with cottages, there's a lot of things that you might want to avoid. So like if you want to bring like 6 or 7 or 8 guests, you might need a big enough holding tank. I don't know, the water supply in these cottage areas could be hit or miss, right? It could be from the lake. It could be like a drilled well that's not maintained well, and so on and so forth. Are there any particular things that you guys see in cottages that you say, no way, we don't want to buy it because this might lead to problems now or in the future?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for us is neighbors. Neighbors are something that we're trying to avoid, given that we are looking at larger units that are accommodating like groups of 10, 12 people. Even if, everyone has the kind of fear in their head that I think is largely unjustified of like having partiers at your Airbnb. That's something you can really easily avoid. But what you can't easily avoid is when 10 friends get together for the first time in like a year, they're gonna make noise. And if they're on vacation on a Tuesday night, it doesn't mean that your neighbors are on vacation on that particular Tuesday night. So for us, like that's one of the reasons that the property that Riley just mentioned we bought is on 100 acres is, just no neighbors around. So that's a really big advantage there. just because we don't want to deal with that additional headache, and we don't want to be putting the neighbors out. So if the guests are just free to make some additional noise, not like they're going to be throwing a big party, but if they're just free to like be out around the campfire at midnight on a Tuesday, then that's a really great bonus for us. But like a lot of the other stuff, like we're obviously in our inspection, or when we're having an inspection done, we're looking at all things like the water supply. We, the first property we got there in Kawartha Lakes, we ended up redoing the septic on it because it wasn't big enough to support the number of guests we were looking to accommodate. But that's a great way to add value to the property. We were able to negotiate down the price based on that needing to be done. So like most of the actual property specific things, the nice thing is like they're fixable. There's something you can do about them. There's a few things that you can't do anything about, and neighbors are one of them. You're not going to be able to, buy out your neighbors anytime soon or just remove them entirely. So there's a few things that we look for to make sure that they're just kind of no fly, because there's not really much we can do about them.
Sounds like you guys know what you're doing in the cottage community. I feel like I was reading, I think it was like one of those like blog TO, like Toronto Life, like just like random stupid articles. And it was about like this horror story where someone had purchased a property and the water well system, like just like the water was contaminated, or there's some like issues with the well and like not pumping out water. And like I had my cottage where it was on a well, and like I knew nothing about wells. So it's just like you don't know what you don't know, and especially coming from the big city. It's like septic, like tanks, like well systems, like water filtration systems. It's like, we're like, why is the water in the toilet like yellow? Like that's not how it's supposed to be. That literally happened when I bought it. What the fuck is this? But so the main question I have, so you guys are buying properties with partners, joint venture model. So the real estate joint venture model is there, and typically in the normal real estate JV model, you're essentially putting in 20% of the capital for the down payment, and then you're funding the renovations as a capital partner, right? How does financing change from that perspective, or how does the capital required, maybe is a better question, how does the capital required change from that normal real estate model to if you're doing cottages? So is it higher down payment, lower down payment? And then going into also on that, are your renovations typically higher because this is now cottage country, Northern Ontario, hard to find good contractors and so on?
So to answer the down payment question, we do 20% down. And in terms of the renovation, so with the renovation, there are going to be different expenses that you wouldn't necessarily have with like more of a long-term rental. If you're not going to do like, if we're going to be doing the furnishings, we're going to have to pay for the furnishings, obviously. So that's going to be something that won't actually add equity to the property. So when we're doing the refinance, you can't really pull that money out. So if we're spending 10 grand on furnishing a 6-bedroom, then naturally that's just going to be money that's left in the property. And so that's the one thing. And then as well, like amenities, we like to buy hot tubs and saunas to make the Airbnbs like a 4-season. So, hey, that's going to be an extra 5 grand for a hot tub, 5 grand for a sauna. That's 10 grand that doesn't add value necessarily to the property's value. So that's something to keep in mind with the renovation for sure when you're looking at a short-term rental. Like where it is a bit more rural, it can be challenging, not going to lie. Especially right now, like everyone wants to do a renovation to the property because they're just at home. And so naturally to find really good help is tough. I tend to not look on Google search. I'm just all over Kijiji, Facebook Marketplace. And what I'll do is I'll actually kind of network with these people and ask them, like, once I find one good person, once I find that one good painter or one good electrician, I'm asking them for sure, like, who do you know that does this? I'm looking for a carpenter. I'm looking for a tile specialist. I'm trying to find the people that you can actually have access to. Like the majority of the public would not be able to find these individuals because they're not listed on Kijiji. They're not online at all, actually. And these great contractors are the ones that are the hidden gems that, just don't have anything online. So you want to find them through kind of your network there. And that just comes from doing a lot of phone calls. Like anyone can do that. It's just a matter of making a lot of phone calls, networking, talking to a lot of people. And you finally do find those really great people. And once you find them, like we just found an excellent handyman that will be our maintenance guy on all the Airbnbs. And we just put him on our payroll for 40 hours a week. Like he's just fully employed with us now because we're not letting him go. Once you find a really good person, it's important to do that.
So true. Competent contractors, I think in Northern Ontario, it's a little bit difficult to find them. And the ones that are like really good charge an arm and a leg. Like they've kind of got like a monopoly on like one or two like small areas, right?
Yeah, that's with like any small area. I was getting a renovation done on one of my properties and they quoted me like double double the cost for a furnace of what I would get in a major city center. I was like, what the hell? They're like, yeah, you know what? You're better off just bringing someone from Toronto over. I was like, yeah, but no one's going to want to go over.
That's exactly what I had to do, man. I had my tiny Ontario cottage flip going on. I gave it to the cheapest guys. I was like, it was a huge range. It was like one guy was at like 20 grand for labor and one guy was at like 80 grand. All right, I'm going to take my gamble on this guy at 20 grand because like, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens, right? And then of course, like super slow, super slow, right? It was like 3-4 weeks in and the guy's still working on like framing up the basement. I was like 2 guys there with him that just like sit around like, what are you guys doing? Like, I don't get it. And then I just fired it down. Like the GPA. I was like, this is, I don't know. So kudos to you guys for finding these guys. And Riley, I think you were actually like living there for a bit, right? If I'm not mistaken, just like making sure the renovations happen, like, or at least you were there a lot. Just making sure that the renovations happen like on time, which as an active partner is it makes sense. It's what's required to make these northern projects move forward, right?
Okay, awesome, guys. And seems like you have a really great strategy going on here. One thing I'm always curious about is the numbers, right? The numbers of a particular strategy. And let's go through some real life numbers and the benchmark that you guys initially calculated, because I know that you like to do things on worst case scenario. I want to hear the worst case scenario numbers and what it actually panned out to. So if you can think of a project that you guys did recently or going through, let's dive into that. So do you have something in mind?
We can talk about a project that we just did. We'll call it Sumcot. That's one of the projects that we just did, and that one will be kind of a good case study to go through.
Awesome. Okay, so how much did you pick this property up for, and how did you acquire this property? Was it on the market or off the market?
Yeah, so Riley was kind of the mastermind behind this one, behind actually the acquisition process. So Riley, I'll let you take that.
Sure. Yeah, it was on the market. So it was on the MLS. We had noticed that the property was actually listed for $670,000, and they dropped it to $620,000. And then the list date was like this was the one that was on the market for over 60 days. And so as soon as we had noticed that, and then the price drop came down $50,000, we wanted to jump on top of it. And the property was pretty distressed. It had spray painted carpet blue, like cleaning the carpets, like they just decided to spray paint them. And like the place just stunk. Like it was pretty gross. He'd smoked in there for 30-40 years. So a pretty gross property. And then the backyard as well just had like a bunch of like junk in the backyard. James was out there like just shoveling out, like it was like a dump site basically. So we actually loaded up like 2 trailer full of like just junk that he had unloaded in the backyard. We ended up negotiating to so it was listed at $620,000, and then we negotiated it down to $520,000.
Holy shit!
Yeah, septic too. Yeah, so we got it down to $550,000, and then that extra $30,000 was actually the septic being installed. So we actually had a septic inspection done. So this is something like a quick tip for anyone that wants to buy in like a rural area, like cottage country especially. Get a septic inspection, hands down for sure. And if it's a well as well, like if you have a well in the property, maybe not a drilled well, but just like an old fashioned open concept well, get the water tested too. Go to the township there, just have the water tested, make sure that there's no issues with it. And that's something, again, like Mayu, you mentioned, like we don't usually have to deal with that sort of thing when you buy properties in an urban center. So the septic was bad. So we just basically negotiated back and just countered it $30,000 off, because naturally the septic was going to be $30,000. So we bought it for $520,000. And then the renovation cost was around $55,000 or $60,000. The furnishings another $10,000, $15,000. So we were in it for around, call it $70,000 between the renovation and the furnishings. And then
the renovation was $60,000 including the septic tank?
Actually, the mortgage broker was able to help us out there and have the banks give us a kickback. So they financed an extra $12,000. So we didn't actually have to pay for the septic there. That just got tacked on right to the mortgage.
Yeah.
Nice.
We were in it for $70,000, and then the ARV right now is 20 around like $725,000. We should be able to refinance it with the down payment and the majority of the renovation cost, not the furnishings or the amenities, but at least the renovation cost.
Awesome. And what does how long have you been operating this Airbnb for? Has it been fully functional now or not yet?
Yeah, so this one's fully functional. We've had it live for coming up on 4 weeks now that we've had it live. We've got the calendar open through for the next 6 months here. Mm-hmm. So this is one where we were kind of projecting, like based on we like to run a real worst case scenario on these properties. So like if we were to look at, this is a 6-bedroom property and we ran the numbers on a 4-bedroom property in 2018, 2019 and use those as our kind of baseline for, hey, what's the worst case scenario? And based on that, our worst case scenario was about $50,000 gross over the course of the year, which would give us enough margin after everything to still be breaking even, all our mortgage payment, our expenses, carrying costs, everything. And so that was reassuring as kind of our worst case scenario. And we figured that the property would do probably close to $70,000 or maybe $80,000 over the year. And we've surprised even ourselves with it, honestly. So we listed it, and within about, I think it was 72 hours before we got to 50K. So we had the entire summer almost booked up within the first week. We're now setting at about $75,000 in bookings between now and the middle of September. So that's basically from June until the middle of September, there's about $75,000 in total bookings. So we're expecting now that the property should be bringing in north of $100,000 gross for the year. And I think a lot of that is due to COVID. We're able to, just because there's such a shortage, some weekends we're literally charging $1,300 a night for people to stay there. And I think that a big part of it is just that there's a huge amount of demand because COVID, people want to get out, and there's just not a lot of supply.
What does that net out to in terms of net profit?
It'll net to about $40,000 in cash flow on the property for the year.
$40,000 in cash flow, which is a lot of people's full-time income, plus a pretty decent BRRRR going on there. Can you tell me a bit of details about the actual property, bedrooms, bathrooms, and what did, it surprised you, right? What do you think made people want to book it up really quickly?
Yeah, so it's a 6-bedroom, 2-bathroom. We ended up, so this is a property that did really well just because it was not super desirable to the typical cottage buyer needing a bunch of renovation work. Part of that was that we added 3 bedrooms in the basement. We finished them off. And then one of the big things that I always tell people, and this is a tip for anyone that's looking to invest in any short-term rental, no matter where it is just really put yourself in the shoes of the guest and ask yourself, what are the amenities that guest wants? What are they looking for? What are their criteria when they're buying a property? And so for us, we know that the people that are going up there to cottage country are a lot of them Torontonians who are bored as heck. They just don't have anything to do lately, because Toronto lately is just a suburb with really great takeout. It's not like the really fun place that it normally is. So we just wanted to load the place up with activities. And so some of those things were bigger investments, paying for the hot tub, paying for the sauna. And some of them were just a couple $100 that I think made a really big difference. We spent $600 on getting a projector and a home theater system so that we can then have a little movie theater in the basement. And there's a great little area for it. So there's this great big, huge projection screen. You can watch movies down there. We also just put, a few $100 into some board games, some yard games like cornhole, spike ball, that sort of stuff. Put a ping pong table in the garage, got some bikes, a couple kayaks, all that stuff. If you add it all up for all those different activity pieces, it's maybe a couple $1,000s. And, when you factor that in, if you look at a $50,000, $60,000 renovation, it's a pretty small drop in the bucket. But those are the things that are going to make the property really perform well. The color of paint on the wall or the decor, it's that's great and it's necessary, but that's not what's going to get someone to go, I need to book this place. I'm going to convince all my friends to pitch in and for us to book this place. It's hey, we're not going to be bored for an entire 5 days. And that's unheard of right now. So I think that was a big contributing factor.
That's interesting. So in the Airbnb BRRRR model, I guess, it's 2 combined. You might not get the money back on the refi, but you get the money back on the cash flow. That's the difference, right? So that's awesome.
Basically, you could have a 40K net investment and your payback period is still less than a year, right? So, who really cares if you're getting your money back within a year? Then you're perfectly fine anyway, right? Whichever way you look at it. Before we wrap up the podcast, I just had one major question, which is, I guess when we're talking about the types of properties that you can buy, how do you guys feel about island cottages and 3-season cottages?
Yeah, not very friendly to them. Islands are hard for people to get to, whether that's maintenance people or your guests. And one thing is one thing that I've learned being in Airbnb for as long as I have is that if there's something that's unclear and not incredibly obvious, then at least one guest will have a hard time with it. You have to really lay out clear instructions with your Airbnb because guests are on vacation. They don't want to think. They don't want to have to figure things out. So having that one extra layer of complication with an island, for example, is not great. 3-season cottages can be really great if we can basically BRRRR them by turning them into a 4-season. We've looked at that on a couple of projects, and that can be great because you can add value to the property by doing that. But if it's going to stay 3-season, then you're missing out on a lot of potential.
What's required to make a 3-season into a 4? Now I'm just asking for personal reference.
I think it's heat, right? For most properties.
Usually it's insulation. You can spray foam like the rafters in the basement. Put insulation there, like in between the walls. Like usually you're working with spray foam, unless you're going to rip out like all the drywall and whatnot. But that's really.
You've also got to heat the water line. You've got to make sure the water line's heated. There's a few different pieces. Like some properties will be a 3-season property that have some of these things done, and other have none of it done. So you just kind of it does depend per property.
No, obviously the financing complexity is going to be another pain in the ass to do with 3 seasons.
Yeah,
true. All right, guys. So I think that was a great episode. I think personally, from a joint venture model, I always tell people like JVs make a lot of sense when you can learn from really good people. So on this side, you've got Riley, who I know quite well from the Corey side and the coaching side. And James, you're kind of the Airbnb master on this. So I think it makes a lot of sense, joint venture model that you guys are offering to people. And honestly, Airbnbs and cottages, it's quite a bit of work. So personally, I think the JV model for that makes a lot of sense. You guys have to find to take that off people's plates. So now as we wrap up today's podcast,
Felt like a coaching session, eh?
We generally like to ask our guests three main questions, right? Where will we be seeing you guys 5 years from now? What's your goals? What are you trying to get to in 5 years?
Sure. Myself, where would I be in 5 years? It's tough, man. It's really tough to tell. 5 years ago, I could have never imagined I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So it's always one of those strange questions because we don't really know. If I had to predict, I'd love to make the transition in my kind of 30s because I'm 25 right now. So say when I turn 30 into like owning a renewable energy business, or just at least being a venture capitalist that kind of buys into and owns pieces of like different renewable energy businesses, whether it's geothermal, solar, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm doing for work. And then I think I'd be living. I'd love to live in Halifax. That's where I was born. There is in Nova Scotia, and kind of live there in the summer months, and then own a property here in Toronto, and maybe a beach home too. You never know. But that would be myself in 5 years.
For me in 5 years, I think the one thing that's always a constant for me is coaching. I've done it for a while now and just really enjoy it. Like I think I was lucky to have found pretty early on what I really, really love doing. So whether it's coaching people around Airbnb investing, Airbnb management, I think that's going to be probably a part of my future for sure, for quite a while, for the foreseeable future at least. But coaching is something that I know will kind of stay as a constant. And I think just kind of growing the portfolio, I think it's really fun. I really enjoy partnering up with cool, like-minded people and working on fun projects like these Airbnbs and different tiny home projects we're working on. So like that. So I definitely think I'll be doing a lot more of that. And then just traveling. I think that's kind of why I got into Airbnb in the first place, is just I love traveling, love to go and see the world. And so I'm super excited for things to open back up. I've already got trips planned here coming up. I'm going to be over the next year. I'll be outside of Canada for a lot of the time.
Living the life. I love it. Most people are just like, I want to achieve this. James is like, fuck it, I'm just going to do it. Awesome. Cool. And the second question here is if you guys won $10 million, I guess, each, so that's 20 million. If you won $10 million each, how would you spend it? And you only have 7 days to spend it. Can't all be in real estate investing. So you got to spend it on some personal things too.
Yeah, I think I'd definitely retire my parents first and foremost, to be honest. They wouldn't have to work again, and the majority of my family wouldn't have to work again. If I just won it, I would certainly retire a lot of people that I know that if they want to retire, of course, and not work again. And then, I'd probably spend, call it like 5 million on people I know, and then 5 million in real estate. And $5 million investment in real estate is obviously, that would help me quite a bit too. So not sure where exactly I'd spend it in real estate, maybe like more apartment buildings, like 10 plus unit buildings. But that's what I would do with that.
Doesn't matter at that point. It's 5 million.
I think for me, if I can't put it all into real estate, and I don't want to give the kind of lame answer of saying that I'd take all the money I can't put into real estate and put it into an index fund. Like, I don't know. The truthful answer to that is that like the prospect of spending $10 million in, or allocating, even if you want to call it that, $10 million in 7 days is just a crazy prospect to me. I think that where I've really gotten ahead in life is when I learned to start being much more intentional about where I allocate my money to, and also where I allocate my time to. So if I had to do it in 7 days and I couldn't invest it all, I would probably just give it away. Like if I couldn't just invest it, I wouldn't. I've been living out of a backpack for the last 5 years because I've just been training myself to not keep buying more stuff, because I found that the more stuff I would buy, the less happy I would get. And so I find that I think if I actually tried to go and spend millions of dollars on stuff, I would just end up less happy than I am right now. So I'd probably just give it away.
Awesome. Wow. That's a really good answer, man. So our last question is, if you guys could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would you choose and why?
I think I'd for sure go to dinner with Elon Musk. I know it's probably a typical answer here on the show, but yeah, I don't know, man. I just want to understand how we're going to get to Mars. I'm dedicated to having Martian babies. I'd love to have some Martians hanging around. But, yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
were they taking people to sign up for it or whatever?
But I feel like I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. But no, I'd for sure love to just go for dinner with Elon Musk. I think if I had to pick a person in the world right now, it would be him. He's just been, I don't know, the most innovative person I know. And I've read his bio there, his book. And yeah, he's a pretty inspiring individual. So
for me, I think I'm gonna kind of game your question a bit. And I'm just gonna assume that this is acceptable. I heard one thing Matthew McConaughey, I think it was, it said at one of his speeches, which he was, the person he's always chasing is himself in 5 years, and himself in 10 years. And that's who he looks up to. And I think that really resonated with me. So if I could sit down and have dinner with myself in 5 years or myself in 10 years and just kind of see where I've ended up and learn some of that wisdom, I think just thinking back to if I could sit down right now and talk to myself from 5 years ago, I think I would be able to make a lot less mistakes and learn some really cool insights that would make me a lot happier and more fulfilled. And, I think that would be kind of my ideal answer to that question. There's not really a lot of people that I think there's a lot of really impressive people out there, but they're all just humans. So I think, sitting down with myself 5 years from now would be pretty cool.
Awesome. Really appreciate you guys jumping on today's podcast. You have both been a wealth of knowledge and actually a very interesting business model, but it makes a lot of sense. And it seems like you guys are absolutely crushing it. Can't wait to continue to see what you guys do in the future. In the meantime, if people want to hit you up, either for coaching, consultation, or want to JV or partner with you, or just ask questions, what's the best way to do so?
Probably the best way to find us is just going to, you can go to bnbinnercircle.com. There's more stuff there, and you can book a call with us through the website there. So just bnbinnercircle.com, or just find either one of us on Instagram, hit us up, Facebook, hit us up. Yeah, we're always happy to chat.
Awesome, guys. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you can to support this podcast, because it helps bring great guests like Riley and James out here. Again, it was a pleasure to have you both on. And until next time, everyone, invest smarter and live better.